Fujifilm just announced their brand new cameras and lenses. I'm going to tell you all about them and share my thoughts right now. Hi everyone, welcome to Pal to Tech. Fujifilm has just announced some major new cameras and lenses. Let's start with the XH2s camera. And here it is. This is a 21.6 megapixel APS-C powerhouse of a camera that contains a brand new X-Trans CMOS 5th generation stacked backside illuminated sensor. This new sensor will be 4 times faster than the X-Trans 4 sensor found on cameras like the X-T4 or the X-T3. So whether you're shooting stills or video, the speed improvements are going to be significant in this camera. Let's start with the shutter. It features a new shutter mechanism that will shoot up to 15 frames per second in mechanical shutter mode with a 500,000 cycle lifetime use on it. In the electronic mode, the shutter will shoot up to 40 frames per second raw format that's completely blackout free. That's full width, blackout free, no crop, up to 40 frames per second. To achieve this, they use dual circuit boards and dual DRAM to double the amount of memory in the camera. Here's a chart showing the number of frames that you can now hold into memory and process, broken down by file type and by shutter type. The camera, of course, includes a built-in mechanical image stabilization unit that now provides up to 7 stops of IBIS. And the digital image stabilization processing also received a significant upgrade. It now provides 5-axis, up from the previous 3, of stabilization that's available up to 4K at 60 frames per second. Let's now dive into the camera's ergonomics. The XH2s is slightly smaller than the XH1 and it's lighter in weight. It will have the same 3-inch flip-out articulating screen as the X-T4. Now some of you, myself included, are going to be very happy about that. Others, not so much. And I will share more about my thoughts on this toward the end of the video. And most controversial, there will not be dedicated dials on top controlling your shutter speed or your ISO. Instead, the camera will have a PASM dial that will include 7 customizable setting choices. Just like the flippy screen, I'll give you my opinion on this in just a bit. Now, on the PASM dial, there's also a dedicated movie setting. You see that right there? That throws the camera into movie mode. However, for the C1 through C7 settings, you can assign them to either a stills shooting setting or a video shooting setting. So for example, you can have C1 be fully set for a still setup, and then you just rotate the dial to C2, and you can have the camera immediately switch over to a video configuration of your choosing. And from what I understand, there is also a default mode that you can customize so that when you quickly press that red dedicated record button, the camera will immediately begin shooting using your preferred video settings. Your ISO will get its own dedicated button on top right here. All of the buttons can be customized, so you could reassign, say, the ISO button to any other function if that's your preference. On the back of the camera, there's a brand new electronic viewfinder that's 5.76 million dots, the same as the GFX 100, with 120 frames per second and 24mm eye point. And there's, thank goodness, a D-pad control, as well as a focus lever and additional buttons that you can customize. One important thing to note, both the front and the rear command dials no longer allow you to push them in. You just turn them only. Fujifilm mentioned that they did this to achieve better weather resistance, but I must tell you that I was a little disappointed to hear about this change because I use the push-in feature of both the front and the rear command dials all the time on their cameras. But for me, the single greatest design change on this camera is right here on the side, where you have a full-sized HDMI Type A port. Fujifilm, I can't say it enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. There's also a mic port and a headphone jack built right into the camera. No need for one of those silly dongles. There's also a USB port with an included cable locking screw. And it looks like, while they have those flappy doors on the ports, from the photo, it looks like you can at least remove them. On the other side of the camera, you've got a remote release cable port and both your CF Express and SD card slots. That's right, the camera is going to have CF Express. Now, these dual slots are for one of each type, meaning that one of them RAM only supports a CF Express Type B card, and the other slot supports only a regular UHS-2 SD card. On the bottom, there's your battery port, tripod mount, and area where you can attach the optional vertical battery grip. Let's take a look at the front of the camera. The controls are larger with rubber keys, and the lens release button has been slightly relocated. But the most significant change is the removal of the focus mode selector. It's no longer a switch, but rather a customizable button. Now, I've got very mixed feelings about this, but in thinking about it for a while, I actually think that this might turn out to be an improvement, especially if you're shooting with heavy lenses or you want to reprogram the button to something else. But until I can actually hold and shoot with the camera, it's impossible for me to say if this is a good change or not. The jury is still out on this one. The XH2s will take the exact same NPW235 battery as the X-T4. Overall, though, the battery life will be 20% better than on the X-T4. Here's a chart showing the number of shots that you can achieve on a single battery in both LCD and EVF modes. And as you can see, there will be an optional battery grip available for this camera as well. Actually, there will be two battery grips. The first is a standard hand grip, which has 2 extra batteries and all the usual controls. You've seen these kinds of battery grips on other cameras such as the X-T4. This is pretty much the same thing here. But there's also a second battery grip that's supposed to be a specific file transmitter grip. It's like the regular hand grip with the 2 batteries and the same controls, but adds a special Wi-Fi antenna, Ethernet Cat 5 or 6 socket, and a USB port for smartphone tethering capabilities. I see this being more useful for sports or event photographers that can then use their camera tethered right into their editing stations or into their network. It also has a built-in feature for multi-camera video recording as well. Of course, the usefulness of this will all depend on whether or not the software or the apps running it are any good. Either way, this sure is not your grandfather's battery grip. This thing is going to sell for $1,000, and it won't be available until September. Now, I've said many times before on this channel that Fujifilm needs to up their autofocus game in order to compete with Sony and Canon. And it looks like they are firmly headed that way. There are 3 significant upgrades to the camera's autofocus system. The first is that autofocus will be 3 times faster than before. This is made possible by that new CMOS 5 sensor that I mentioned earlier. The second improvement comes to the autofocus algorithm itself. There's better prediction for moving subjects, better zone autofocus, and better handling of low contrast situations. The camera will control phase detection pixels independently from image display while in burst mode. And third, there's a whole new set of face, eye, and subject detection improvements added to the camera. You've got not only human, but animal, bird, automobile, bicycle, airplane, and train. The only thing missing on there is unicorn tracking. The camera will also use AI to choose what type of tracking algorithm it's going to apply based on the movement of the object, whether it's moving quickly or slowly and so forth. In addition to everything I just told you, the autofocus system also has a better ability to focus on smaller subjects, as well as maintaining focus on the current subject even when another subject is in the foreground. This should be a huge benefit for street photography. Improving the autofocus is the #1 request that Fujifilm users have had. So, have they now gone and done it? To me, it looks like Fujifilm is back on top of their game with this. But it's one thing to see a product release announcement and quite another to experience, test, and use day to day. So while this was the part of today's announcement that I was absolutely thrilled with, I'm still remaining cautiously optimistic. Once these cameras get into the hands of photographers and filmmakers, we'll know more. Until then, stay tuned. Let's now talk about the new video features. The XH2s will shoot up to 6.2K at 30 frames per second in 10-bit 422 video with up to 14 stops of dynamic range internally into the camera. That's right, you're not going to need to use an external recorder to get those specs. The camera now offers an internal Apple ProRes codec, which makes it the very first Fujifilm camera to store the Apple ProRes format internally in the camera. You can also output both ProRes RAW and Blackmagic RAW files via HDMI using an external recorder. Okay, but are you sitting down? Here goes. For the 6.2K resolution, the camera uses the entire sensor and will output your video footage at 6240 by 4160 with no crop factor. It will use the entire frame. You can now also shoot in 4K up to 60 frames per second, also utilizing the entire sensor area. There's also DCI 4K and regular 4K up to 120 frames per second, but that has a 1.29 times crop factor. And lastly, there's full HD up to 240 frames per second. Now, in addition to recording in regular F-Log, the camera now offers F-Log2 that will give you up to 14 stops of dynamic range when shooting at 6.2K or 4K at either 30, 25, or 24 frames per second. In all other modes with F-Log2, you'll get up to 13 stops of dynamic range. Now, it's important to note that F-Log2 has a base ISO of 1250. Basically, you're going to want to use F-Log2 if you're needing to improve areas like highlights in your scene. Now, the camera also has a single native ISO and will not be utilizing twin or dual ISO. Now, all this processing power comes at a price: heat. So Fujifilm is launching an optional cooling fan that you can use to extend the record time if you're shooting in warmer temperatures. The fan doesn't need a cable or power. You just attach it to the back of the camera when needed. The USB port on the side of the camera can also connect to a USB PD power supply and run both the camera and the fan while you're recording. The fan is $200 and it will be available at the same time as the camera on July 7th. And I see why it's optional and not permanently built into the camera. It doesn't need to be. Have a look at these specs here. You can shoot 4K 60 frames per second in 25 degrees Celsius temperatures up to 240 minutes, and the fan won't make a difference either way. You don't need it most of the time. It's when you're shooting at around 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit that the fan will give you an extra 30 minutes of record time. Most people, I don't think, are going to need this, but it's a great add-on and it's available for those that do. This was one of the smarter decisions that Fujifilm made concerning the ergonomics of the camera, balancing the need of your average video shooter with some users that will need to achieve those longer record times at higher temperatures. Now, there's some additional features included with this camera as well, most having to do with speed. For example, the USB port now supports USB 3.1 Gen 2, which offers a data transfer rate of 10 gigabits per second. There's also an HDMI 2.1 improvement on the HDMI port. And you can finally plug the camera right into your computer and use it directly as a webcam. No software or app or anything else needed. That's awesome. As I've said before, the camera will retail for $2,500 and it goes on sale on July 7th. Now, I have not seen nor have I tested this camera. Everything I have told you today is based on Fujifilm's recent announcement. Before I give you my final thoughts on this camera, let's quickly go over the new lenses being announced. First up, we have a new silver XF 150 to 600mm f5.6 to f8 weather-resistant zoom lens. Now, this will be available in July and it will be priced at $2,000. The lens will have an internal zoom, just like the 50 to 140, where it telescopes out the zoom, but the lens itself remains the same size while you're zooming. This new lens will weigh 1,605 grams and it'll take a filter size of 82 millimeters. It will also have OIS, giving you up to 5 stops at the 600mm focal length. The removable tripod mount on the lens is configured for an Arca Swiss adapter plate. The next lens is a black 18 to 120mm f4 weather-resistant zoom lens. Now, this will not be available until mid-September, and it will cost $900. Now, this is going to be a power zoom lens, and it offers a 27 to 183mm equivalent in the 35mm format. It weighs 460 grams, and it takes a filter size of 72mm. Now, what's interesting about this lens is that it has 3 rings on it: a focus ring, a zoom ring, and a third toggle ring on it that can be set to either zoom or focus. The toggle ring is controlled by several buttons that add the power features. It's parafocal with a stepless aperture, so there should be no shifting in brightness while you're zooming. You set the speed of the mechanical zoom inside the XH2 camera, and then you use this third ring to manipulate your mechanical zoom or to pull focus. And lastly, regarding the final announcement about a new 40 megapixel megapixel high-resolution camera sensor. We'll just have to see the details when they're available later on this year. I just don't want to speculate, and this video is getting long enough, so I'll leave it at that for now. So here's my thoughts on the new XH2s camera. First, I think that Fujifilm has made it pretty obvious that they've heard our autofocus concerns loud and clear. If the autofocus turns out to be as good as they're mentioning today, this new X-Trans5 sensor may give Sony and Canon something to be seriously concerned about. As a Fujifilm user, their autofocus issues were really starting to get to me. I've mentioned in videos before that autofocus was the absolute #1 improvement that they needed to make. And from what I can see today, Fujifilm is clearly headed in that direction with the speed, the AI improvements, but the only way to be 100% sure is to start testing and using the camera. So I'm going to leave that topic with a big stay tuned and move on to my next point. Ergonomics. There's been a lot of discussion online about the removal of the PASM dial, the cooling fan, the focus mode button replacing the switch, and the flippy screen. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and I've come to the following conclusion. There may one day be the perfect stills camera. There may one day be the perfect video camera, but there will never be a perfect stills and video camera. The needs and the ergonomics in creating these two different art forms are just too varied. Take the PASM dial, for instance. Some stills shooters will be very upset at losing the dedicated shutter and ISO dials. However, for video shooting, how often do you really need to change your shutter speed? A lot less than you would be if you were shooting stills. So, do you need on a video camera a dedicated dial taking up space to make shutter speed settings that you'll almost never use? Or take the flippy screen, for example. For a street or event photographer, using a camera that has a fixed fold-up screen like the X-T3 is perfect. But for a video shooter, being able to manipulate the LCD screen up, down, and all around is a real benefit. For myself, I will never again purchase a camera that does not have a flip-around screen like the X-T4. Never. But my needs are not your needs, and vice versa. I do think that overall, Fujifilm is headed in the correct direction with multiple XH2 cameras and an optional cooling fan, for instance. The cooling fan in particular was a great idea. You take your basic camera that can do almost everything, and then you offer the user the choice to selectively add or remove modular components to further customize it to their specific needs. I think ultimately this is the direction you want to go if you're moving toward a perfect camera system. But until I can get an XH2 in my hands and start using it, if that ever happens and I find a spare pile of cash somewhere, it's difficult for me to say for certain if these ergonomic changes are for the better. Based on what they announced today though, I think this will be one of the best hybrid video cameras you can get on the market in 2022. And given even the new lenses announced today, I think Fujifilm knocked it out of the park for everything mentioned in today's announcement. The bottom line is that this is a great time to be in the Fujifilm camera system, and I hope to one day be able to also try out the XH2s, as well as show you how those camera settings and menus work. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you found this video helpful or at least entertaining. And if you did, be sure to give it the like and subscribe. I will see you again in another video very soon. Take care.